ZocDoc is a free app where you can find amazing doctors and book appointments online. Book an appointment with a few taps in their app and start feeling better, faster with ZocDoc. It really couldn't be easier. I use ZocDoc and you should too. You too, Mom. Go to ZocDoc.com/something and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/something, ZocDoc.com/something.
Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
Hey, my sweet Strangerlings. We're heading into the holidays, and we thought you'd enjoy some nostalgia from Something Scary for the next few weeks. Longtime viewers may remember these compilations that we used to do, so we are excited to bring them back. Hope you enjoy.
Magdalena was ready to take on Manhattan. She rented a tiny apartment and found a job at an ad company. She quickly became friendly with a junior executive named Paxton McNamara. Pax was very handsome, and when he offered Magdalena a tour of the city, she was thrilled. He introduced her to restaurants, the Met, and hidden parks. Eventually, he led her to his plush apartment in the East Village. All her dreams were coming true. One early Saturday morning, Magdalena made coffee in Pax's apartment as he readied for a last-minute meeting at the office. When he was out the door, Magdalena dove back under the covers instead of leaving like usual. Within minutes of falling asleep, she was startled awake and screamed. There was a woman hovering above her with jet black hair and angry eyes. "I am Adele McNamara, his wife," yelled the woman. Magdalena couldn't make sense of it. She had no idea Pax was married. "I didn't know," Magdalena cried. Adele grabbed Magdalena's hand and sliced the palm with an ebony black blade, causing Magdalena to writhe in agony. Still holding her hand tightly, Adele began to whisper something in another language, and her eyes rolled back in her head. "A lesson needs to be learned," Adele said before disappearing as Magdalena passed out. A few hours later, in a nearby coffee shop, Magdalena sat shaking, her hand wrapped in gauze. Pax walked over to meet her, knowing how much trouble he was in. The moment he laid eyes on her, he began to weep. Not from guilt, though, from the sight of Magdalena. Once mesmerized by her beauty, now when he looked at her, all he could see were dozens of writhing snakes swirling around her head. They were coming from her scalp. He tried to explain, but wouldn't make eye contact. Magdalena realized the waiter and the gentleman who entered the coffee shop had the same reaction. She was terrifying to every man in her presence. Pax apologized, and then he ran away like the coward he was. Magdalena stumbled home, heartbroken and afraid, men turning away in dread or disgust as she passed by. She reached her apartment and locked the door. Slid under the door was a notice of eviction for unpaid rent. A voicemail from work said that her affair with Paxton required her termination. Her bank account was nearly empty. For weeks, she wept in despair, knowing she'd have to leave. She'd secretly followed Pax home one evening and discovered the second apartment where he lived with Adele. With nowhere to go and little money, she grew desperate and went to see a woman named Lady Bardot who dabbled in black magics. She no longer cared for Paxton, and low-key thought having men be terrified of her made her feel safe in a way. But her chosen profession required interaction with all genders, and one day she would want to re-enter the dating scene, so this curse must end. As soon as Magdalena entered, Lady Bardot could see what all the others were seeing. The only solution, she said as she handed over a dagger, was to cut the curse off at the root. Magdalena knew exactly what to do. That night, she watched Pax enter the apartment. She snuck in after him, and as he was unlocking the door, Magdalena pushed them both into the hallway, slamming the door shut. Before Pax could react, she took the dagger out, raised it up, holding it close to her own eye. In his panic, his eyes followed the dagger and finally made him look directly at Magdalena. She stared into his soul, focusing on her hatred for him and what she had become. In that moment, she felt what they all had seen. She felt the snakes around her face, writhing and hissing at Paxton. There, right before her, Pax turned to stone and then crumbled into dust. And just like that, Magdalena felt better. She wasn't sure if it was the magic or the revenge, but he could never cause such hurt from cheating again. She closed the door and made her way home. Early next morning, there was a knock on the door. It was the landlord. Through the peephole, he said there had been an error. Not only had her rent gone through for the previous months, but he also had a bouquet of flowers from someone congratulating her on replacing Paxton as a junior ad executive. She flung open the door, forgetting her curse. She froze, but he didn't flinch. She was back to normal. However, upon taking the bouquet and reading the note attached, her face grew more and more astonished. It read, "Congrats on the new job, and thank you for taking care of that side job I gave you. It turned out better than I could have hoped. A lesson needed to be learned." The note was signed by Adele McNamara, the late Paxton's new and apparently happy widow.
Miley worked at a coffee and cronuts. She was looking up at the counter when her new coworker, Arenas, walked in. Despite Arenas barely uttering a word her entire shift, Miley was thrilled to be working with anyone besides her boss, Chaz. And Arenas seemed to be catching on quickly and focused on getting her work done. Miley was happy to see Richardson, her favorite customer, come through the door. Every day, he ordered the same black coffee and paid for it with a detailed drawing on a napkin. "I love it," said Miley as she stared at the image of a woman with snakes for hair, bat-like wings, and bloody tears streaming down her face. "That's a fury," Richardson said. Miley pinned it behind her on a corkboard covered in dozens of Richardson's other mythical illustrations. He struck Miley as socially awkward, but his art was amazing. "Furies are deities of vengeance," he continued. "They have to be summoned in order to punish someone. They lash them to death with studded whips." Miley smiled at his colorful imagination, but before she had time to think any more about it, Chaz walked in. "Guess what? I'm being made general manager," he said. Miley's stomach sank, as did her smile. There were already complaints about Chaz from other employees. 3 had quit in the last month due to his temper. Miley had already dodged his anger and his petty outbursts. But now she and Arenas were the only ones left. Arenas was quiet and new and would be harder for Chaz to bully. Miley knew she would be his next target. And it didn't take long. If Miley was running late, he'd shove warning papers in her face. He told her to quit school because this is as far up the corporate ladder she'd get. One night, he berated her in front of customers. Arenas just looked away. Finally, one night after they closed up, Miley was in the office counting the drawer and Arenas swept the floor. Chaz entered the office and locked the door. Within seconds, he flew into a tirade, knocking money to the floor. He shouted she was useless and couldn't even count. He pushed Miley out of the way, knocking her to the floor. She crawled out as fast as she could and ran outside past Arenas, crying. Arenas ran for her purse, and that's when Chaz came up from behind her, grinning. He grabbed her face. "Are you gonna be trouble too?" he yelled. He then jumped back. Blood streamed down her face. She was actually crying tears of blood. She smirked as she saw his fear. He watched as his eyes saw her back begin to widen, like something was trying to break free from under her sweater. She lunged at him, digging one hand into his arm so hard it made him cry out. With the other, she grabbed what she was looking for in her purse, a whip with metal spikes. Chaz froze, unable to defend himself as he stared at her, mesmerized as her hair appeared to dance. Arenas hissed as she began to lash him. The first one knocked him to the ground, but the ninth, all the flesh on his torso, had been ripped up. He was barely hanging on. She towered over him, hair now snakes, her shoulders huge wings behind her. With one last heave, the spikes flung straight into his skull, killing him instantly. The next morning, cop cars surrounded the place. Miley had been called into to answer some questions. Dozens of regulars waited outside trying to peer in, but all anyone could see was blood spatter on the windows and a body covered with a sheet on the floor. Miley stood in shock, surveying the carnage. She asked the police officer who was on the floor, fearing it was Arenas. The cop informed her it was an unidentified male. He asked if she had access to the security cameras, so she pulled out her iPad to pull up the footage, but something told her to watch it before sharing it with the police. Her face turned pale and she began to tremble. Richardson walked out of the crowd to comfort her. He explained she had seemed like she needed help, and he hoped it was okay that he had called for her to punish Chaz. As the cop approached, Miley paused. Before he could see, she deleted the file. She claimed the cameras hadn't recorded anything, and she never mentioned Arenas. Miley felt bad for lying to the police, but Chaz had deserved it. Richardson had known it too, as real friends always do.
Arjun, a young Indian man, was tilling his father's crops when a large cobra surprised him in the field. Instinctively, he drove his rake into the snake and killed it instantly. He immediately regretted killing the reptile, but had to finish his work before what the weather reports were saying would be the worst storm of the year. Once the storm hit, everyone in the town of Kimsa sheltered in their homes, including Arjun and his father. Thunder cracked over and over as an unending stream of lightning bolts danced across the sky. Arjun peered out the window and through the heavy sheets of rain, saw a young woman wandering the street in front of his house. The wind pushed her about until she fell to the ground, and Arjun sprang to his feet and ran outside. He lifted the woman out of the puddles and offered his home as protection until the storm passed. The woman was so grateful for the help. She explained that she had missed her bus and thought she could make her way home before the storm hit. Arjun lit the fire while his father went to make hot tea. Finally, getting a good look at her, Arjun was mesmerized by her beauty. "I'm Fatima," she said as her deep brown eyes pierced his soul. The house shook with each boom of thunder, and the lights flickered as the wind picked up speed outside and shook the power lines. Arjun and Fatima lit candles while his father barred the doors and windows. The storm was expected to rage for hours, and there would be much destruction to contend with afterwards. Arjun just hoped their house would survive the night. Fatima suggested they play 20 questions to get to know one another. Soon, Fatima learned that Arjun had been working on the farm since he was 9, and Arjun learned that Fatima worked in town and had recently lost her husband. During dinner, Arjun's father went over the young man's chores, and that's when Arjun remembered the snake. Filling his father in on the guilt he felt made the man chuckle. "That snake would have ruined the crops. You did the right thing. Let's just hope it wasn't an Ichhadhari Nagin," his father joked. His father explained that if a snake lived for 100 years without doing harm, it became sacred. and was granted the power to transform into whatever it wanted. The snake Arjun saw looked like a cobra, and his father asked if he had seen its mate. Arjun shook his head. He hadn't. Then you're fine, because if there's a mate, they are not to be separated. And if one of them is killed, the other will seek revenge. His father jokingly hissed at Arjun and then began cleaning up the plates. Even though he knew his father was teasing him, he still felt worried. Fatima then put her hand on Arjun's. It was only folklore, she said. Arjun relaxed and focused on the fondness he began to feel for his guest. But slowly, Fatima's gentle embrace grew tighter. At first, this made Arjun smile, but as she continued to squeeze, Arjun's fear returned. Her nails dug into his skin, and his bones began to creak. Arjun screamed in pain. Arjun's father ran into the room just as Fatima began to transform. Her eyes turned yellow, and her skin separated into scales as it turned a shiny black. The woman's hair fused together into a hooded shape, and finally, the hand squeezing Arjun's hand tighter and tighter became her tail. She writhed before them. Her transformation back into a giant cobra was now complete.
You killed my husband, and now you and your family will pay,
she hissed. Her head then snapped forward like lightning and bit into Arjun. Her fangs sunk into him, but released only a small amount of venom, just enough to render him immobile. Arjun watched helplessly as the giant cobra whipped her tail around his father's legs and pulled the man hard to the floor. The cobra made a pleased hiss as she slowly dragged Arjun's begging and screaming father across the floor towards her fearsome maw. Her cobra head rose above Arjun's father, and his eyes widened. Her first strike was to his jugular, ripping flesh and veins apart. Arjun's father gasped for sounds he could no longer make as she swallowed his windpipe. She then struck his stomach, ripping his organs, sending them flying through the house. And finally, while Arjun watched his father struggle with consciousness, Fatima punctured the patriarch's eyes with her fangs and released her poison into his brain. Tears streamed down Arjun's paralyzed face. Soon, the poison would wear off, and he would be left there alone with his dead father and a lifetime of guilt. The Ichhad Hari Nagin slithered from the farmhouse and found her way to her mate. She coiled up next to its lifeless body and looked into its dead eyes again, where she then saw the image of its killer, Arjun, slowly fade away. The cobra, Fatima, looked to the raging heavens above her and said,
I'm ready.
Her serpentine gods heard her plea, and a bolt of lightning surged through the sky and struck her down. She took her last earthly breath, joining her mate in the afterlife, where the two lovers could be together forever.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. We just got through Thanksgiving and we're quickly approaching the rest of the holidays. And for me, that gives me a ton of anxiety because I never know what to get people for gifts and it's just way too stressful. And it's helpful for me to talk it out and get out of my negative thought cycles with a professional. And therapy gives you a place to do that. So you can get out of the thought cycles and find some mental and emotional peace and maybe some gift recommendations as well. Therapy helps you find and stay connected with what you really want while you navigate life. And you can make those decisions and move forward with confidence. If you're looking for therapy, give BetterHelp a try. And it's so easy to get started with BetterHelp. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/scary and get 10% off your first month today. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/scary. So if you're like me and you have multiple Thanksgivings to go to, you definitely have some leftover turkey, and those are usually great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits than going cold turkey. And we're not talking about some weird situation with your uncle at the dinner table during Thanksgiving, or, your crazy neighbor that wants to bring over a Jell-O mold. We're talking about fume. And they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything is a bad habit, and instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from the habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume has delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of being bad for you, Fume is here to help. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. And I was recently gifted one, and I absolutely loved it. It was super helpful when I was at my grandma's house with all of my cousins and everybody freaking out. You know how that goes. So I really loved having this little device that was kind of, adjacent to some other things, but it's not bad for you. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that it can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use code SCARY to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code SCARY to save an additional 10% off your order today.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.